There's only been a handful of NBA dynasties throughout history, but there's been countless times an organization tries to create a dynasty, yet it doesn't pan out. What exactly constitutes as a dynasty anyway? Does that team have to win multiple consecutive titles, or is just 1 or 2 titles enough? What about a team that reaches the finals over and over again, yet loses to a superior team? Can they still be considered a dynasty? Anyway, how's it going, folks? My name's Andy, and today let's take a look at 5 NBA teams throughout NBA history that should have been dynasties. But ultimately, they did not become one, for one reason or another. Before we start, I just want to let everyone know I made a TikTok account recently where I'm uploading short clips from videos on my channel. These clips are condensed, and some of them you might not have seen them before. So if you're interested, check it out and follow and drop a like and all that. My handle is AndyHoopsYT. The Toronto Raptors. In the summer of 2018, when the Raptors made that blockbuster deal to acquire Kawhi Leonard, there was a sense of uncertainty. Yeah, sure, Kawhi was a far superior player to DeMar DeRozan, but he just sat out an entire season with the Spurs, supposedly rehabbing through an injury, but the fans got impatient with him not returning. The Raptors gave up their franchise player who's been with the team for his entire career and meant so much to the franchise, even if he wasn't good enough to lead them to a title. However, right when Kawhi put on a Raptors jersey, it was clear that he meant business. Kawhi played better than he's ever had before, and as we all know, he led the Raptors to the title. The thing is, even though nobody doubted Kawhi's commitment to the Raptors, throughout the entire season there was this air of precariousness, a gray cloud that hung over the Raptors season, because the biggest question still remained. Will Kawhi re-sign with the Raptors and stay with the team? The answer turned out to be no, and I think when they won the championship and he was quoted saying, "They can build off of this." Not we, but they. It was as clear as day he was gone. Fortunately for Raptors fans, they got closure when Kawhi said his decision to go to LA was solely a personal decision, to be closer to his family. Still, they missed out on a potential dynasty. The Raptors with Kawhi, if you take into account the development of Pascal, OG Anunoby, and Van Vliet, they'd be a legitimate force in the East, heck, arguably the best team in the conference. Though there are other factors involved. If this timeline did happen and Kawhi stayed, does he still get injured? Do the other Raptors develop into who they are today if Kawhi stayed and took up a huge chunk of the team's possessions? Perhaps? I don't know. One thing's for sure, if Kawhi did stay, they'd still be fighting for the title, not fighting for a playoff spot. The Portland Trailblazers. Now here's a blast from the past. Bill Walton, drafted in 1974 with the first overall pick, made an immediate impact upon his arrival to the NBA. In his 3rd season, he led the Blazers to the championship in 1977. Then in 1978, he won the MVP in just his 4th season in the league. However, when the 1978 playoffs started, that's when his life changed forever. In Game 2, he suffered a broken navicular bone in his ankle. And little did everyone know, this would be the last game he'd ever play for the Blazers. But it wasn't exactly this injury that forced him to sit out. During his recovery, Walton claimed a fracture actually happened much earlier than the playoffs, but the Blazers forced him to take pain-killing injections so he can play, and even noted that this happened to numerous teammates as well. The Blazers' medical staff apparently mistreated or flat-out ignored their injuries. Walton stated, quote, "On April 18, 1978, when I had an undiagnosed stress fracture in my foot, they injected me, in my foot and ankle, with a massive amount of pain-killing medication. I went out and played in this game, hadn't been able to play in months, went out and played, and the undiagnosed stress fracture, the bone in my foot split in half." Walton's teammate Bob Gross also had a stress fracture in his left ankle, and he too was given a combination of painkillers and injections to play. Walton would ultimately file a lawsuit against Dr. Bob Cook, who worked for the Blazers. In protest of this mistreatment, Walton demanded a trade and sat out the entire 1978-79 season. Eventually, he would sign with the Clippers, but his foot injury never successfully recovered, and he was never the same player ever again. Now, imagine a world where Walton never got injured and stayed in Portland, and if they had a competent medical staff. The Blazers were such a young team on the rise. with their starting lineup being an average age of 24. Had this team stayed together, they definitely could have competed with the Lakers in the West during the 80s. And perhaps Walton's Blazers could have won a couple more titles after that and became a real dynasty. The Boston Celtics. When Kevin Garnett and Ray Allen joined Paul Pierce in Boston, most basketball enthusiasts would say this marked the start of the super team era. It wasn't the first time something like this happened, but it was the most notable in the modern era. Prior to that, the three of them had fantastic individual seasons, but struggled to win in the playoffs. Now, with them together, they found instantaneous success, winning 66 games and claiming the NBA title. Though the path there was kinda rocky. In the playoffs, they got pushed to 7 games in the first round. That should not happen for a team as dominant as they were. Still, with this kind of success, you expect them to continue for a few years longer. However, despite being on track to repeat that title, an injury to Kevin Garnett hampered that. Then, afterwards, they did make the finals again, but that was it. 2 finals appearances, 1 title. I'm not sure you can quantify that as a dynasty. Their fall from glory coincided with the rise of the Miami Heat, as one titan fell and another took its place. This new obstacle proved too much to overcome. In 2011 and 2012, the Celtics ran into this new Heat super team, and lost both times. In 2012, they honestly had a chance to win. They were up 3 games to 2, and if it wasn't for LeBron going nuclear, they could have had it. By 2013-2014, the Celtics blew up the team, mostly because their time was up. Their core was approaching their mid-30s, untimely injuries caught up with them, and with the rise of stronger teams in the East, they could not keep up. To be honest, even in their lone championship season, the Eastern Conference was incredibly weak. This was at the twilight years of the Detroit Pistons, and the rest of the teams in the conference maybe had 1 star on their team max. To win 1 championship is an accomplishment, but I feel like for what the expectations we had for this team were, and the landscape of the NBA at the time, they could have squeezed out 1 or 2 more. But hey, that 1 title certainly benefited some folks. Doc Rivers has been milking that title to immediately get a new head coaching job every time he gets fired. Paul Pierce has clinched onto that title to constantly talk smack. This team wasn't a dynasty, but it certainly was very influential. It changed the reputation of a lot of players on this team, and it changed the landscape of the NBA forever. The Oklahoma City Thunder. You saw this coming, and this team needs no introduction. In 2012, we saw a very young team led by Westbrook, Durant, and Harden reach the NBA Finals. You add on some good role players in Serge Ibaka, who led the league in blocks, they had their core to build around, and their future was looking bright. Then, of course, after they lost in the finals, the Thunder decided to throw a lowball offer at Harden, which prompted him to leave. The reason for their low offer was because A, they wanted to avoid the luxury tax because they are a small market team, I guess. And B, he got shut down in the finals. His performance was quite bad, so it turned off the team from making a better offer. Now, you can make arguments here and there, like, hey, if Harden stayed in OKC, he would never get the touches to become a superstar. He would never get the opportunity behind Westbrook and Durant taking all the shots. I do think there's some truth to that, but it's also true that this core of players was the best chance OKC has ever had at winning a title. This was a dynasty in the making, with a core of players the front office drafted by themselves. It's so rare to have a homegrown team become as great as they are, so that's an accomplishment in itself. However, one must wonder, what could have happened if Harden remained? Their primes would overlap with the rise of the Golden State Warriors. Just imagine the battles they'd have in the playoffs. Man, we missed out. We missed out big time. And finally, the Utah Jazz. For nearly 20 years, John Stockton and Karl Malone had a multitude of chances to win the title. You had the best power forward in the league paired with one of the best point guards of all time, both of whom were absolute Iron Men, barely ever missing games due to injury. This duo was made for each other. They played so well together, yet they have nothing to show for it but 2 finals appearances. One thing to note is that the Malone and Stockton Jazz first made the finals when they were approaching their mid-30s. They were still having phenomenal seasons, but they were exiting their primes. You might be wondering what happened in all those years before 1997. There were so many years where Malone and Stockton had even better seasons, yet their teams faltered in the playoffs. That was a running trend, especially for Malone. Everyone knew he was a superstar, but every time the playoffs came around, he'd usually underperform. In some series, he shot the ball really poorly, and it's reflected in his career numbers too. For his career, his true shooting percentage dropped over 5% in the playoffs compared to the regular season. Malone, in like 90% of the series he played in, he should have been the best player on the floor, but he'd get outplayed by someone on the other team he should not have been outplayed by. I can give many examples of this. In the 1987 playoffs, he got outplayed by Sleepy Floyd in the first round, and they lost, despite being favored to win. In 1989, Chris Mullin and Mitch Richmond ran him off the floor in a stunning sweep in the first round. In 1990, Malone choked in Game 5 and missed 6 important free throws, while Tom Chambers severely outplayed him. Stockton also often got outplayed by guys like Terry Porter and Kevin Johnson in the playoffs. And in 1994 and 1995, when MJ was out of commission, the Jazz got dismantled by the Rockets both years, with Hakeem dominating him. He made Malone look like a role player. Overall, in their younger years, these playoff underperformances prevented them from going any further. Plus, their supporting cast outside of their two stars was always underwhelming. There's a reason no one remembers anyone on those teams besides Malone and Stockton. Maybe Greg Ostertag, Brian Russell? There was little depth to those teams, and that's why they could never get over the hump. Anyway, that's all folks. Let me know your thoughts on these teams, and can you think of any other potential dynasties that should have happened, but one thing or another prevented it from happening? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope y'all enjoyed the video, and of course, as always, I'll see you next time. Peace.